Welcome to Schweitzer Drive, a podcast where we explore what goes on between the generation of electricity and the light switch. Join Dave Whitehead as he interviews the entrepreneurs, innovators, and experts who are inventing the future of electric power.
Hi, I'm Frank Harrill, Vice President of Security for SEL, and I'm sitting in as host today for Dave Whitehead. I have a very esteemed guest to talk to today about standards. Before we get into that, I just want to set the stage a little with just a comment about how our reliance on the electric power grid, we all know, continues to grow, and so does the need to protect it from cyber threats of all types. And it's great to have frameworks and standards to guide in that effort. And I think our guest today and I share a common belief that compliance isn't the goal. True security is, but good, solid, internationally recognized standards are a great way to advance that effort of true security and bring compliance with it. And today I'm talking with as I mentioned, cybersecurity standards expert Andre Ristaino about how industry standards and specifically IEC 62443 have been for years and continue to shape the future of industrial cybersecurity, and including enhancing the security of the electric power grid in ways that many of us may not even understand. But Andre consults on strategy and policy and business development for OT cybersecurity programs, products and services through his company, Black Mountain. And stakeholders include asset owners, product suppliers, industry organizations, and then government entities. He recently retired a really esteemed career from the International Society of Automation. Many of us know Andre through that relationship where he has been just a stalwart advocate for cybersecurity for 18 years. He led the stand-up of 4 ISA industry consortiums and 2 conformity assessment programs, which are still paving the way for true cybersecurity. Those include the ISA Security Compliance Institute, the ISA 100 Wireless Compliance Institute, the ISA Global Cybersecurity Alliance, and we're all hearing much more about this, and it's taking hold worldwide, the Incident Command System for Industrial Control Systems. Also, you'll hear that referred to as ICS for ICS, really a way to apply tried and true incident response and incident management systems that have been used in public safety for many decades, bringing that expertise and bringing that framed response protocol into the ICS sphere. And Andre, we owe you a big debt for that and all of this. Prior to the ISA, he held positions at NEMA, Renaissance Worldwide, and at Deloitte's Advanced Manufacturing Technology Group, where he was a recognized leader in system lifecycle methodologies. And I just want to say on a personal note, we jumped at the chance, Andre's now retired to consulting, but just an absolute true professional. Breadth and depth of knowledge is really unparalleled. Expertise in artificial intelligence and, in addition to just all around cybersecurity, ICS cybersecurity expert. And we're really fortunate, Andre, for you joining us today. So just want to express my personal gratitude for your service over the years. I've learned a tremendous amount from you. And I think many folks in this industry share that observation. Let me just kick off with a question. Would you, Andre, first tell us how you became involved with cybersecurity standards, specifically 62443?
Yeah, sure. So you gave a pretty good synopsis of my background and career. I have a background in information technology. I put in ERP systems and connected with MES systems in various manufacturing environments. I eventually developed expertise in FDA validated systems, predominantly in the pharma industry, but a lot of work in government, state government, state of California, and then federal agencies, including the U.S. Air Force Logistics Command. That's where we applied a lot of our SDL knowledge on large projects. So I was a hands-on practitioner. Over time, I developed, multiple practices and became kind of a serial business builder, either working with new startups or expanding service capabilities for product companies. And I kind of finished up my last gig and was looking for my next opportunity, and saw an advertisement at ISA for a business development person. They were seeking to stand up a conformity assessment program at ISA. They're an ANSI accredited standards development organization, and they recognize that more value is gotten from the standards when you have a complementary conformity assessment program with it. I had no specific background in cybersecurity at the time. And so over the 18 years, self-taught like I did with anything else, one of the best skills that was left over from my days at Deloitte was they'd throw you into a new industry or a new application, and you had to stay one day ahead of your customer and learn at night while you were consulting during the day. And so you learn not to have any fear to take on something new. And so I took this on. I started there in 2007. At that same time, there were a leading group of suppliers: Honeywell, Yokogawa, Invensys, which is now Schneider Electric, some of the oil majors like BP, Shell, ExxonMobil, and Chevron. They were bemoaning the fact that every time they had a project, they had to go through all the cybersecurity evaluations on a one-off basis, and it just made sense to stand up some type of a clearinghouse or certification scheme specifically targeted at commercial off-the-shelf products. And that's where that started. So we put together a team, started to develop specs, the technical specifications, and then the program specifications, policies, procedures for, defining what certification is. How do you do maintenance of certification? We address product security capabilities, and also the product development practices, which is equally important. We were actually ahead of the standards. We had a certification scheme that was published prior to the standards. We did our first certification in 2010, 2011 timeframe, and the component certification, the component standards 4-1 and 4-2, they didn't exist yet. And we actually donated our security development assessment scheme to this 4-1 standards committee, and they adopted that as the supplier practices standard 4-1. So that's where that came from. It's largely based on Microsoft SDL. I signed an agreement with Microsoft, and they allowed us to, encouraged us actually to use their SDL, and we adapted it to use, for OT.
Let me jump in there because I think you touched on some really interesting points, and that is, and some of our audience may not quite understand what the IEC 62443 family of standards is, and I think you touched on a really important point, that 4.1 is really sort of the foundational secure development lifecycle requirement standard. But could I ask you to provide, as we get into that, just a high level overview of the 62443 standards and what their true importance is in industrial cybersecurity writ large?
Sure. That's a great question. So the 62443 standards are probably the most complete set of practices related to operational technology. That's things that spin and move. And it addresses all the different dimensions of it. So in large part, it's divided into three general sections. One section covers suppliers for developing the off-the-shelf products. There's three standards for that. The 4-1, 4-2 for component security capabilities, and 3-3 for system-level security capabilities. And I mentioned before, 4-1 addresses the product development for both components and systems, the product development practices. Then there's also a standard that addresses service providers. So the service providers are the system integrators. What are the system integrators? What are the requirements for them to securely design and build systems from all the components? and deploy them at asset owner sites. And then there's some requirements for maintenance service providers, because obviously if you install a system and it's secured and built properly, you don't want to do maintenance and upgrades on it and degrade that. And then there's a set of standards for asset owners, 2-1, which is describes how to run a security management plan at an asset owner site, an operating site. 3-2, which is the risk assessment standard. That kind of drives everything you do. And I mentioned the 2-4, which is the integrator and service provider practices. So three different audiences, and that's probably a key thing to understand, because when folks are discussing the standards, like I'm pretty emphatic about making sure that we understand what audience we're talking about. And when we're talking about securing things, are we talking about securing what's at the asset owner site? Or if you're talking to a supplier, you're talking about building in security and managing and testing, et cetera, so that the commercial off-the-shelf products meet the security requirements that are defined in the standard. So the standards define the security levels, 1-4. They also define maturity levels for practices, 1-4. That's an informative piece of the language. And so that's the good thing about the standards, in that the security levels are already defined. And that's something that, when you look at the different industry sectors, each of them has their own way of trying to articulate what security really is. And the standards are wonderful in that they create a common language for having a conversation about security.
And that's something that may be really helpful for folks to understand, are those security levels based on attacker capability. Could you touch on that briefly?
Yeah, so there's 4 security levels, and it's really security capability levels. So if you're looking at a product, you're looking at the different security features that are built into the product. And there are some, there's a set of features that meet security level 1, that's kind of baseline. And then if you get up to security level 4, that's like the highest security level. So there's things like two-factor authentication, encryption in transmission, encryption of data at rest. But you're describing security capabilities of the product. So you could buy a product that has security capability level 3, but if you implement it improperly, you're not going to get your value out of it. So the security capability levels are valuable in that if you're an asset owner and you do a risk assessment on a particular control system at your site, let's say it's transmission, automated transmission and distribution, and you do the risk assessment using 62443, you identify that you need a 3+ level of security, 3 or security level 4. What that tells you is, what security capabilities you want in your system. But the big value in the bigger picture is that as you're doing upgrades, maintenance, and replacement, when you go to procurement, you're going to seek products that already have those security levels built in. So in other words, you want to seek to buy the products that meet as close to your security capability level as possible. And that provides you a couple of benefits. One is that you don't have to do remediation on products that don't meet your security capability level. So you get some economic savings there. But one of the other things that's not obvious is that when you're piecing together these systems, and they're typically from many, many different suppliers, it's easier to integrate systems that all have the same security level, or at a minimum have a security level 2 or above. If you have security levels that are deficient in systems that you're integrating, you have to do a lot of workarounds, compensating controls, and that sort of thing. And so what you end up with is a very brittle system, meaning that if you make any changes to it, it can have a ripple effect or it becomes much more complex. So the more security that matches what you need that's already built into the product, the more flexibility you have in the future for doing your upstream or downstream maintenance and services and that sort of thing.
It's a great point. And I think these standards serve too as a guidepost and a kind of a North Star for product for manufacturers as they design the next generation of products. Because as we all know, these products, across the industries, plural, have decades-long lifespans. And, many were designed when the threat landscape was, most were designed actually when the threat landscape was far, far different from today. And having this common vernacular, having this common syntax, and having the framework that can be expressed and consistent across industries is incredibly valuable. And I want to ask you, you've touched on some of the benefits of certification, and one of those, and I just want to echo, and when you sit in the seat of a supplier, you quickly realize how many types of supplier evaluations exist that become inefficient when when every customer has a bespoke, customized evaluation process and criteria. And 62443 becomes a very economical, effective, and very efficient way to measure supplier effectiveness with regard to cybersecurity in a way that did not exist before. And I want to, maybe this is a good time, Andre, to touch on a study that you recently did in conjunction with the Utilities Technology Council and Cumulus, which mapped 62443 to NERC SIP standards. And SIP standards, as many of the audience members or listeners will know, is the critical infrastructure protection standards in the electric industry. But would you touch briefly on that in terms of its mapping to other standards and requirements in certain industries, this being the electric industry?
We've done lots of mappings of 62443 to other standards and practices, or I won't go into all the details, but the importance, our main objectives for the mappings were to show the applicability of the standards to the different sectors. Most folks don't understand that the 62443 standards were designed as a technical horizontal, meaning that the technology used from one industry sector to the other is pretty much the same. An embedded device that manages something that spins and controls or monitors a process. They use a lot of the same equipment, and we've heard complaints early on that the 62443 is just for industrial only. It's only for a manufacturing site. And that wasn't its intention. And so what we did was we mapped to other, like I said, other standards or paradigms. Anyway, so we did this for the electric sector. I've been doing a lot of work in the electric sector with NATF and other organizations, the national labs, and we wanted to show the applicability and the coverage. And so the NERC SIP standards, the folks in the industry know that the NERC SIP standards predominantly apply to the asset owner. It's a performance-based standard, that says what you need to achieve, and so they have to then infer from those and performance standards what the security capabilities of products that they're putting into their sites need to include. And so we worked with a subject matter expert, Tobias Whitney, and some other reviewers, and we mapped the requirements with the implied, or if you want to call it, inferred security capabilities. We mapped it back to the 62443 standards. And from a practices perspective, there is 100% coverage. So in other words, if you're doing 4-1 security practices as a product supplier, you're going to meet 100% of the NERC SIP requirements that the asset owners are going to ask for. It had 95% coverage for the actual security capabilities. There was one or two requirements that 62443 didn't have. And the 95%, that's a pretty good number. There were some oddball things, and you get that with every sector. But one of them was like security for modems. acoustic
Yep.
modem.
Yep.
So there's this legacy stuff that's out there. And so, yeah, you need to address that. But, for your mainstream monitoring and control technologies, you're not going to miss. And the beauty of that is that most of the suppliers that the asset owners are purchasing from are international organizations. They sell globally. So it whipsaws the suppliers if they have to conform to a regulatory language in one country versus another versus a third, et cetera. And so we look at the 62443 standards as like the common language, or the Esperanto, if you will. You conform to them as a supplier, and then conforming to regulatory requirements then becomes a paperwork exercise, mapping back to what you're already doing under 62443. And so you're going to get economic efficiencies that way. But this was just one of the sectors that I thought was an important sector, and we've been pursuing that to try to improve the understanding and usage of 62443 for that sector.
That's fascinating. And really 62443 as a trade enabler is not something you normally think about, but it really is. And having that common syntax, that common vernacular, is a huge thing. And as you say, you have spent and been so generous with expertise, you and others at ISA to map to other standards and other frameworks so that that cross coverage is there. And let me touch on that by asking how, there are other standards, and maybe one of the better examples that I can think of is ISO 27001, which, envelops the entire corporate information security management system. How does a standard like 62443, 4142, how does it complement and interact, if you will, with ISO 27001 and standards like that?
For an asset owner, let's talk about the asset owner's perspective for a minute. So historically, they've had requirements from the financial accounting firms that do their annual audits. They have to do certain types of evaluations like SOX and ISO 27000 on their IT systems. I did evaluations of IT departments when I was at Deloitte. And so the 27000 does a nice job of defining how to build and manage an information system management program corporately and at your sites. The technology and the objectives for ISO 27000 is similar, but not 100% the same. In the production operations, let's say for a manufacturer, if you're a big oil company, they use different technology, and its objectives are uptime and visibility on the processes. And so when the corporate IT department is putting their plan together, they can do kind of a little exit out of their plan and have a sub-plan that addresses their operational technology, and the two dovetail together nicely. We've written one or two papers on that describing how 62443 works just fine with an ISO 27000 shop, if you want to call it that, but they work fine together. One of the things 62443 does in the 2-1 standard, it does define how to set up and manage an information systems security program. And so that's something that you don't need to duplicate. So if you already have that as a corporation, including like the training and policies and procedures, you already have your pieces in place. You used to have to both add on the specific requirements defined in 62443 that are specifically applicable to the operational technology. And it works great. A lot of companies are already doing that. You look at some of the big suppliers, organizations like Siemens, they tout that over and over again, that they use ISO 27000 for their enterprise systems, but in their manufacturing operations, they're using 62443, and they found a nice way to dovetail those together, and I think many others are.
Yeah, I agree, and I think they're complementary standards, and you expressed it really well about how they fit together and really envelop each other. And the other attribute of 62443 is can you explain the concept of of the horizontal standard and how 62443 fits in that category, how it is not prescriptive, but leaves a lot of decision making to the adoptee, if you will, of the standard.
Yeah. So first of all, the standards define the requirements. They say the what's. What do you need to do? You must have, encryption. You must have two-factor authentication, but it doesn't tell you how. So the implementation details, it leaves a big enough sandbox so you can use multiple approaches, whatever works best for your particular use case. So that's how the standards are structured. As far as a horizontal standard, I mentioned earlier that the technology that's used. I mean, if you look at the IT world has servers, workstations, storage, and it's all pretty much the same. It's very standardized, but there's a lot of applications that run in it. Similarly, operational technology, you have distributed control systems and SCADA systems. That's all pretty homogeneous hardware and operating systems, but there's different applications that live in them depending on the use case. And so the standard addresses both the technology, the hardware. For instance, in the 4.2 standard, it addresses the embedded devices, the network devices, the application software, and then the host systems. Those are like the Windows and Linux workstations. So those are all viewed as fairly horizontal commodity type usages other than the applications. And so when you go from one industry to the next, much of that's the same. So what's happening today in the standards group is they're developing what they're called security profiles. So let me back up for a second. So the 62443 standards, it was called out from the beginning that it wasn't going to be sector specific. And as a horizontal standard, that means that as different industry sectors seek to develop standards for their own sector, they're directed by international standards organizations to use 62443 as their baseline, and then develop security profiles for any nuances, any exceptions or extensions they need for the uniqueness of their particular either use case or industry sector. But those variations tend to be very small.
Right.
So
right.
Security profile is just an overlay on the standard. It looks at the requirements rows and said, this is applicable, this is not, this is missing, we add this. So it's similar to what you see in this ISO 27000, which has a statement of applicability.
Which basically defines how you've implemented, what controls you've implemented, and what the scope of the, so I mean, I think they complement each other in that way also. And I wanted to loop back quickly, because I may have cut you off on the security level discussion too, because I think we touched on and summarized the component level security level targets, but 6243 also contains system level security level, which really mirror that of the component. Can you just touch on that briefly, how there is also not only the component specification for capability, but there's also capability specification for the entire system, comprised of different components.
Right. So they're an analog. So 62443, the component security capabilities that are in that standard, there's about 120 of them. Depending on what security level you seek, dictates which of those requirements you have to conform to. So, for example, security level 1 has 80 out of 120 of the requirements. Security level 2 may have 100 out of 120. Security level 3 maybe 105, 110. I don't remember the exact number. And then security level 4 has 120, all of them. And so 62443 3-3, which is a system level, also has a list of 100 or so security capabilities. They're a little bit, many of them look the same, but there are some that are different because you're talking about a system that does a lot of things versus a component that usually does one or two things. And so similarly, if you put it in a matrix, security level 1 may have 50 out of 100, and security level 2, 80, et cetera. And so they're both very well articulated. So there's no ambiguity about what the security capabilities of your system must be to achieve a level 1, a level 2, a level 3, or a level 4. So it's very well engineered and makes it easy to have the discussions around security for your operating sites.
Got it. Well, speaking of making things easy and simple and understandable, sometimes standards themselves, and 62443 is no exception, can be daunting to an organization that is just starting down that path. We talked about, even in our very brief conversation, a lot of numbers, a lot of nomenclature that can be alien, 4.1, 4.2, 3, et cetera. What would your advice be to an organization just starting down the path of 62443 certification? I think you'd recommend, because you have to, starting with 4.1, but what would that path look like? You've done this, you've seen this over many, many years. Give us that, the easy button, if you will.
Yeah. So first of all, 62443 is used mostly for doing assessments and improving your security. You're not always, it's not a given that you're going for a certification. You're a product supplier, so that comes top of mind to you, because certified products make sense. But the first step is to get some training. And there are a lot of companies that offer 62443 training. I'm a little bit biased. I think ISA, the source of the standards, we've been doing training for many, many years. Last year, we trained 3,500 to 4,000 students in the standards. But get the training. And the reason is that you have to have a common language to be able to have a discussion about security. And that's the importance of the standards. It gives you a vocabulary, it gives you lexicons, all the models for the discussion. I've seen it too many times where you have several people having the discussion. They're not real specific about, are we talking about what the supplier needs to do, or are we talking about what the asset owner needs to do? So the first thing is take the training, 3 days, and you learn it. It demystifies the standards. There's 15 parts. Some of the parts are, terms and terminology and, the models and that sort of thing. But that's the first thing. And then you can have a sane discussion, because you're using words just like in law or any other professional discipline, where the common language, helps you have an efficient conversation, and you're not getting all crossed up on the meanings of words. So that's the first step. There are a lot of consulting companies out there, some good, some not so good, but there's a lot of great ones out there. I would bring in a consultant. Usually they have templates for, here's your path for standing up a security program here at your site for your operational technology. You don't have to do everything. They have the template, and they'll help you have the discussion and prioritize what to do first. Personally, for me, training is number one. And number two is policies, procedures, all the things that you can do where you're not investing in any technology. Get that squared away first. It takes a while to really understand what's important. And investing in technology immediately is usually a mistake. You really have to have a good idea of what your goals are before you invest in technology.
In the 4.1 Secure Development Lifecycle Requirements certification or process, is that the genesis? Is that the beginning down this path? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. So now we're talking about suppliers. What should a supplier do? So the first thing a supplier should do is, embrace the 4-1 standard. It articulates good product development practices, from design for security to good coding practices. It addresses, it actually gets a little bit prescriptive about testing and release processes. There are certain tests that it calls out, like communication robustness tests of static and binary code analysis, et cetera. And also has a requirement for incident response. So if your product's involved in a security breach, you have to have processes for determining, was it your product problem? Was it a procedural problem at the customer site? Or was it just a breakdown in discipline from somebody at the plant floor? And so you have to have a way to triage that and have a defined response time and plan to either call out a workaround or remediation, or in worst case, don't expose your system to anything until we get this thing fixed. But yeah, the 4-1, the practices, even if you don't, you can delay the product security capabilities, but if you have good practices, what's going to happen is over time, you're going to start squeezing any security vulnerabilities out of your product. As each release comes out, your product's going to get better and better. And that's a very good investment.
And that may be poorly understood too. And I know we're talking in the supplier context, and I want to touch briefly just on asset owners too, because I think there's some developments in the standard there too. But I don't know that folks really understand the depth and breadth of the 4.1 control set that must be implemented, ranging from the curation of third-party software components, which implies a mature software bill of material process to even know what you're curating, to independent penetration testing. I mean, there are 40 plus. We won't go into them here, but it really is cradle to grave, a sustainable, good, solid, secure by design process. And actually, credit to you and to ISA and others, that's before we started seeing this from other bodies like CISA. Secure by design was inherent in the 6443 standard from the get-go. So let me ask about that. Do you see is the next, for asset owners, and I know there's a new program out there in that vein, the next evolution of the standards, which have now been around for a while. They're very mature. What's coming up next, do you think?
So the biggest item right now is developing a specification to address cloud functionality. Every operation, I don't talk to anybody who's not got applications connected to the cloud. Now, the 62443 standards prohibit process control from the cloud. There are a lot of companies that are doing process monitoring and analytics offline using cloud functionality. All that's good. The cloud functionality, just supercharged your ability to improve your operations and monitor. But right now, control in the cloud is not allowed by the standard. A lot of companies are doing it. I know there's one oil company who's got all their oil wells. They have a cloud-based SCADA system, but they've done a risk analysis and said, well, if it goes down, the wells are going to still operate, and it's not going to take us out of business. And so those are things that, even though it's not in the standard, that individual asset owners, if they do a good risk assessment, they can make that that determination as to if it's low enough, then go ahead with it. But that's not articulated in the standard just yet. There's a working group 9 that's working on that. We also did a study on applicability of 62443 to cloud operations. That's another report. It's about an 80-page report. It's probably one of the best reports that analyzed use of cloud for operational technology. So it's free download. You can go to the ISA Secure website or the ISA GCA website. It's on there. There's a similar, if you look at AI, that's a big discussion now. Mm-hmm. How much should we apply AI to controls? And, AI is being used for analytics and kind of like scuba gear for the mind, for the operators, if you will. You can go places that you couldn't normally go without it, and that's great. But right now, there's being studies to determine, where's that bright line where you're going to turn over full control to a cloud-based system or an AI-based system. And so those are the two things that are coming up. There's a lot of people working on these AI concepts right now. I'm sure DOE's doing it. I was in a small group of people that were just kind of doing it offline, but it's a who's who of the companies, the supplier companies, and then some a couple of the asset owners. But those are the areas. The other things that are being worked on is I mentioned the security profiles. So in the electric sector, there's a working group. I think it's working group 14. They're doing a security profile for substations. I expect to see, more security profiles come out for like distributed energy resources, transmission and distribution, automation, automated transmission and distribution controls, and some of the other power generation. Although power generation is pretty well covered by the standard itself as published, because it's kind of an industrial production process. And so, it fits well into the way the standards are already written. They address that pretty well.
Well, I just want to say thank you again. Plus, I want to reserve the right to request your permission to use the AI as scuba gear for the mind observation. I haven't heard that, but I really like that. But I just want to say I was comforted when I learned you retired, and you're still being generous with your expertise developed over decades in consulting. And so I think a lot of folks can benefit from that. And I just want to thank you today for being so generous with your time and expertise. We covered a lot of ground. I know you're passionate about this topic. I love talking about it, and I'd love to have you back to talk about where this heads next, because as you noted, technology is changing so fast, and the operational sphere will go right with it, and how we meld these things like AI with industrial control systems and is something is definitely a work in progress, and something we have to get right. Can't afford to get wrong.
So before we sign off, there's one other thing that's cooking along. So under the ISA Secure program, we focused the first part of our lifetime on product certification, and we did a pivot, and we're doing a operating site assessment program now. That's going to be formally announced and launched in mid-year. There'll be an announcement in June. We're doing training classes for it, but the 4 standards that address the asset owner operations, the 2-1, 3-3, excuse me, 2-4, and the 3-2 risk assessment. There's 346 requirements in that. So that's one of those big showstoppers for companies saying, well, how do I adopt these standards? Look at all those requirements. This is complicated. What do I do? So when I was still at ISA, I worked hard on kicking off that program, and it's like ready to go in a few more months. But what it does is it takes those 346 requirements, and we've defined a set of assessment methodologies for each one of those requirements to make it easier for people to use and understand. The other nuance on the standard are that there is some interrelationship, like between the 2-1 and the 2-4 service provider standards, et cetera. Most people don't understand that. But we've had a group of the best experts in the world working on this spec. And so we have that logic built into our assessment methodology. The whole objective is to have a standardized way to use the standard. And we have a standardized report format so that if you have one consulting company come in and assess one system, they're going to use this methodology. And if you have another one come in at a different site or maybe in a different country, it'll all be the same. And then you can start doing roll-up reports. And we don't want to deliver it using PDFs and spreadsheets. We're partnering with software companies. The first one is SecurityGate. So all this is going to be built in with a nice, friendly user interface, and it'll be easy to understand. We have a 3-day training class for that as well. And so the whole objective of the program is make the the standard's a lot more usable, a lot more adoptable, and user-friendly through the software. We're even having them build in some of these logic interplays, like if you're doing a particular requirement and it says, well, if your operation does this, then you need to look over here at this other requirement and it'll take you there. So we're trying to make it easy. Adoptability, usability is the biggest, one of the biggest impediments. And so that's coming out in a few months here.
That's excellent. Yeah. Piercing the complexity of, or reducing the friction with, for embracing what really at the end of the day results in good, actionable, usable cybersecurity. And I can't thank you enough for explaining that. You made all this understandable and digestible in a way that few can. So thank you very much, Andre. I owe you a personal debt of gratitude for being, again, generous with your time today. And we really enjoyed learning from you and look forward to doing that in the future.
I'd love to come back again. Thanks a lot, Frank.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you for stopping by Schweitzer Drive. Join us again as we learn about, explore, and celebrate electric power. For more information about the show, please visit selinc.com/Schweitzer Drive.